Welcome to a new Motorsport.com F1 update. From the F1 paddock, of course, after the Qatar Grand Prix. I could say a rather eventful Grand Prix, thankfully more eventful than the sprint, but probably even more eventful post-race with everything going on in the paddock. So lots of topics to discuss, but of course the obvious place to start would be the McLaren strategy, getting it wrong by not making the pit stop under safety car conditions. I talked to some other teams in the paddock, and some people, including Red Bull, they said we specifically discussed the lap 7 option. If that scenario would come up, it would be a slam dunk to come in and do at least one of the 2 mandatory pit stops. So for the others, it was crystal clear. For McLaren, it was not. And of course, by them not coming in, that was quickly linked to the papaya rules. Because the idea was also in the media center that probably boxing 1, which basically would be textbook. McLaren said we were the first one, so that was complicated. But if that's complicated, then the textbook solution would be to at least box 1 car and split the strategies. But maybe McLaren didn't want to do that because you can favor one over the other, and that might be complicated in this stage of the World Championship. But McLaren, both on the record and off the record, they were pretty quick to emphasize that that was not the background to this decision. They said no, had nothing to do with the papaya rules, nothing to do with not wanting to favor one over the other. They just say we messed it up. Off the record, they use some stronger words, but they say we completely messed it up. We, miscalculation basically. And they are still investigating why that happened, so why they got it so wrong. But for now, they came up with 3 reasons. The first one is that double stacking was a bit risky in their opinion, especially with all the traffic in pit lane. And they thought, well, maybe the second car would lose out massively. So that's one aspect. The second one, and that's by far the main one, is that they were surprised that all the other teams did come in for the first stop. And they thought if some of the others would stay out and McLaren would box, that the drivers would end up in traffic. The whole irony is, of course, that by not boxing, the drivers, at least Lando towards the end of the race, did end up in more traffic than he would have liked. So it completely ended completely differently than what they expected. But that was the second reason. And the third one was also pretty clear over the radio. That was McLaren thinking that having the flexibility with the strategy would play into their hands. In the end, it didn't do it at all. Stella also admitted that maybe in hindsight, they should have used the hard tire in the second stint and not the final stint, because basically they could not really attack on that hard tire. So that was probably another mistake. But by far the biggest mistake was by not making use of the opportunity to pit on lap 7. The big question is, what does it all mean for Abu Dhabi? And that's exactly the question I asked Andrea Stella in his post-race media session. And his answer was pretty clear. He said, well, nothing, because we will not change our approach. And that means they will not prioritize one driver over the other. It's worth a discussion because Max is even closer. Max is even more of a threat, even more like the character from the horror movie that Zach Brown talked about going into the weekend. But Andrea Stella said, no, we are not going to choose between our drivers as long as the chance is still there for Oscar to fight for the world title. He has all freedom to chase his aspirations. That were the words that he used. Also, after today, probably it would be a bit complicated and difficult to go to Oscar and say, hey, today we basically screwed your strategy, but now we're also going to choose Lando. So that's something they will not do. Oscar Piastri was quite down talking to the media in the pen. In the media pen, by the way, Zach Brown came in, gave him a hug and apologized. Maybe he knew the cameras were rolling, but still wanted to apologize for what happened today. And Oscar said, this one hurts me more, hurts a lot more than what happened in Vegas. It's also quite obvious because in Vegas, because of the double DSQ, he didn't really lose points compared to Oscar. Today he did because, winning the race would have gained him, 7 points compared to what he got now. So he said, this one really hurts. But McLaren will not change the approach, but they will, before Abu Dhabi, so in the upcoming weeks, they will sit down with both drivers and discuss some scenarios. And that could mean that if halfway into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, if something is necessary to secure that at least one of the McLaren drivers gets the title and not Max Verstappen, then they might get on the radio and ask some favors. I'm not sure how Oscar would reply in that case because, everything, stuff going against him this season might complicate such a request. But McLaren made clear that, from a team perspective, we still have to think about those scenarios. But going into the weekend, no team orders, not prioritizing Lando over Oscar, even if that means that Max might nick the title. But they have always emphasized that. Andrea Stella and Zach Brown said, this is how we go racing. Yes, the 2007 scenario is pretty much there, but we are willing to take that risk. The main thing, when Stella replied to my question and said we're not going to prioritize one driver, the main thing he said is we have to be in a condition to deliver a perfect weekend, to improve our execution. And that's been the weak point in recent weeks. Stella said the car has been quick enough, the drivers, okay, maybe sometimes made some small mistakes like Lando Norris in qualifying, but in overall they have been there. Just the overall execution has not been good enough. And yeah, that's pretty clear because they got the right height wrong in Vegas with the plank wear. They got the strategy wrong here. So that's something they want to make sure that does not happen again in Abu Dhabi. And that's where the focus is pretty much on. Well, all of this, of course, has brought Max Verstappen back, even more back into the championship fights, just 12 points behind now. Could have been 10. If Andrea Kimi Antonelli didn't lose the place to Lando in the final stages of the race. About that, I talked to Helmut Marko in the paddock after the podium ceremony, and he was quite outspoken. He said, Kimi Antonelli waved Lando Norris by, and it's already the second time this year, and he took Max out in Austria. So I think, of course, it was quickly after the race, so probably still a little bit emotional. I tried to nuance it a little bit and told Helmut, well, after that, Kimi also lost 5 seconds on his final lap. And he had a massive moment, so maybe there was a little bit more to it. But Marko said, no, it's quite obvious. He is helping the main competitor. And of course, that refers to McLaren. So Marko was quite outspoken. After it, those words were put to Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff. And he got pretty annoyed when he heard it because he said, it's utter nonsense. And how brainless do you need to be to come up with something like that? So he basically slammed the suggestion by Helmut Marko. Kimi Antonelli himself explained in the pen that he almost lost the car. It's also visible on the onboard. So he said, I did not do anything on purpose. I just had a massive moment, almost crashed, could save it, but then annoyingly lost the position. Also because he wanted to hunt down Carlos Sainz, basically tried a bit too much and paid the price for it. However, Red Bull itself still pretty happy, of course, with the performance they put in today. Yes, a strategy was the key, but they've also been positively surprised by the race pace, not just on the medium, but also on the hard tire. Marko said we were competitive, maybe more competitive than what we thought going into the race. Max Verstappen himself was pretty calm, relaxed as always, basically. And he said, well, today has been a clear example of what he already mentioned going into the race weekend, which is that, yes, he is still in the championship fight, but he's mainly in the fight because of the mistakes of others. And of course, that relates back to McLaren, that relates back to Vegas, relates back to what happened today. So Max said, we do everything we can. We are all in. That has not changed, but I still need things to go my way in Abu Dhabi. And that's true because still a podium finish for Lando Norris is enough. So the only thing that Red Bull and Max can do is to put the pressure on. And that's what Laurent Mekies after the race made clear in his post-race media session. He said, that's exactly what we do now. It maybe helps that it's Max Verstappen, a four-time world champion, hunting you down. Maybe that has a psychological effect, not only on the McLaren drivers, but also on the McLaren team. So that's where mind games come into play. And Red Bull still very much all in to make a miracle happen, because it will still be a miracle. Helmut Marko shared a nice anecdote post-race. He said, when Laurent Mekies took over, I addressed the factory in Milton Keynes. So Marko addressed the factory. And he said, back then, I told them I still believe in this championship fight. Marko said, I was the only one, but everything completely flipped now, because now the whole team is behind it, believes in it, has momentum. So Helmut is not the only one believing in what he still calls a miracle. Well, that's all to be seen in Abu Dhabi. Before that, we will get some other Red Bull news, because on Tuesday after the race, or Tuesday after Qatar, they will announce the 2026 driver lineup. And that's not just Red Bull Racing, but also Racing Bulls. Helmut Marko already made it clear in the paddock, but today Laurent Mekies confirmed it on the record. So Tuesday will be the day. It's already pretty obvious what's going to happen. Of course, Isaac Hadjar is on pole position to be promoted to become Max Verstappen, his teammate. Arvid Lindblad is on pole position to be promoted to F1, and therefore the Racing Bull seat. And then for the second Racing Bull seat, it's basically a straight fight between Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda. One interesting note on that is that Red Bull is still discussing with Honda about the TPC test in 2026. They, of course, change engine manufacturers because they will compete with their own Red Bull Powertrain's Forward engine. But for the TPC test, so testing days with a car from at least 2 years ago, they still need a Honda engine. The FIA basically made it mandatory for engine manufacturers to supply the engines to the teams that switch from engine supplier, but there is no price limit, so Honda can ask whatever they want. It's not a massive problem for Red Bull because it's outside the cost cap, but they are still negotiating the terms on that. And the question that came up in the paddock is whether or not Yuki Tsunoda can play a role in that deal to maybe get something off the pill. So that's something we will find out on Tuesday. If we come back to this race weekend, you would almost forget after all the drama on Sunday night in Qatar. But we have to talk about Carlos Sainz getting his second podium of the year and therefore his second podium with Williams. And in the post-race press conference, he said, "This is probably my proudest day with Williams." You could also hear on the radio what it means to him. So another standout performance, just like in Baku, Carlos Sainz making the most of some opportunities. And to be fair, also the pure race pace was impressive. Of course, following around here, overtaking, extremely difficult, but the Williams was just really good on pure pace and tire management. So that's a positive note for Carlos on the day that his former team once again struggled. The weekend in which Ferrari struggled massively. Charles Leclerc said yesterday, zero performance in the car. Fred Vasseur talked about that after the race and said, well, one aspect that hurt us maybe more than the opposition is that the front tire pressures went up massively. Of course, Pirelli being a bit afraid with the cuts in the tire after Friday, so they maybe went a bit too much on the safe side. I would say that was the same for everyone, so for all 10 teams, but Vasseur explained that it maybe hurt Ferrari a little bit more in terms of car balance, and if you look at the onboards, the Ferrari was really a handful. Still, Vasseur said, I don't regret the decision we made to put everything on 2026 really early. Yes, that makes the last weeks of this season extremely painful. They have basically been out-developed by not only McLaren, but also Red Bull and Mercedes, and these weeks they are clearly paying the price for it, which makes it highly frustrating for the drivers. But Vasseur said, I still believe that it was the right decision, and I still believe that we can take the benefits from it in 2026. We will see that in a couple of months or maybe even weeks' time. But before that, we will all go to Abu Dhabi and hopefully have a intense and interesting final race of this Formula One season. On Thursday, we'll of course be back with a new F1 update, then from the Abu Dhabi paddock to discuss everything from Media Day in Abu Dhabi. So hope to see you again. And for now, thanks a lot for watching.